Hi there folks, in this video I'm going to talk to you about performance debriefing. My name's Steve Ingham and welcome to the Supporting Champions YouTube channel. So performance debriefing, I'm not going to undersell this one. I think that performance debriefing is one of the most powerful, but equally perhaps one of the most neglected areas in performance thinking. Elite teams will often do this. It's something that's ingrained in the elite performance mentality that you perform and you reflect afterwards. So this isn't just necessarily about leaving it to the end of the season or the end of a big phase or after pursuing a big goal. This is a case of being able to get skilled at reviewing and reflecting, perhaps on a more routine basis too. And what I'm going to try and do in this video is going to give you several different frameworks. So there are three major things that you need to be thinking about, kind of the conditions for a performance debrief, the questions that you can ask, and then some of the topics that you can consider. So a quick story for you just to illustrate some of the first concepts we'll be coming into is when I was working with one particular sport and we were going through a yearly cycle, so that's an annual cycle leading up to a major competition. On one year we had good successes, on the other year we didn't. Okay, so the results were different and how it felt was different at different times actually. So when we didn't have good results, actually we had some reasonable processes, we had some good momentum in the team, we had good progress, we had a good team ethic, but the results just didn't match up. And then another instance when actually the results came, but I'd look back and think there was poor process underpinning it. We didn't really act well as a team and we didn't look after each other and we didn't break new ground and progress what we were doing. So what you should see in that instance is probably very different types of conversations and therefore different priorities about what you might tackle for the review process. But one of the things that I'd noticed was that both times I was sat there thinking, well, I've got a good suggestions to why results went as they did, whether that was the team working or whether that was the results. And for example, in the situation where the results didn't really go that way, I was able to quantify that. I was able to put some numbers on some of the fitness figures that the athletes I was working with weren't achieving, so they weren't hitting those scores. And I was sitting around the table thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to get asked this. What's the rules? What's the permission? How does this work? At what point do I interject and suggest something and put that forward? And it didn't happen. I didn't get that invite. And so perhaps naively, perhaps because I was a bit gung-ho, I put it forward to say, I've got something to add under these circumstances. And what I found was that actually the physiological fitness of the athletes wasn't as high as we'd expect, but also they were higher during the season and it went down towards the big competition. And to my surprise, that I found that I was suppressed. I was told that that wasn't the case. I'd got it wrong. I need to review my processes. And I've got some pretty good, valid, reliable data in front of me to show that that wasn't the case. But important people spoke and my view was put down. And so what I observed for two very different years where results were good but the team working wasn't great, but for where the results wasn't great but the team working was good, what I actually heard was the conclusion from it all was that we're just going to do more of what we've done before. I didn't really feel that that was discerning enough to be able to adapt, to modify, to cover off some of the weaknesses, to make sure that people were being looked after in a way, whether it's their team working or whether that's actually supporting somebody towards results. We weren't really looking after them and supporting them with objectivity in mind, with a good quality debriefing process. Now, the reason that I mention this is that this perfectly illustrates the fact that you need to make sure that you start with getting the conditions right. Because if you haven't, you might have the intel, you might have all the facts and figures and the information about what actually happened. But if you don't create the right conditions, a lot of that's not going to get heard or considered. And so the first important aspect of a performance debrief is creating the conditions. The first condition is to be able to support people to speak openly, to be able to speak their mind, to offer their observations, to make a contribution to the team. And it's important that everybody has a chance to be able to do that. It's critical that you create conditions for what's called psychological safety. And so this is the understanding that you can take a risk, in this instance speaking, and do so without it coming back to bite you. So without that fear of retribution. And this is essential because it just gets the information out. And so if it's sitting in somebody's mind, it needs to be heard, it needs to be aired. And certainly if somebody is feeling as though they need to be able to offer this forward for consideration, it's probably going to have gone through a number of filters for people. And so in a debriefing system, you've got to be able to make sure that people can speak openly. Speaking is only one half of that particular equation. You need to make sure that there are conditions that support optimal listening. And that means actually that you're free of distractions, that you're fully involved, whether it's a one-to-one meeting or whether it's in a group situation, that you are fully present, no laptops open, no phones on the table, that you are intent and you're there, and that you've got good quality breaks so that people can give their all in intentional support and listening. And so the key skill that's required when you're listening is to be able to summarize back. And so here what we're looking for is that I might make a contribution and then somebody says, I think you were saying this. Have I got this right? And did you say this? And summarizes that back. And so that just means that somebody is heard. Now a build upon listening is to appreciate the variety and the difference and the different perspectives. It may well be that somebody offers an opinion that is different from you, but that's not surprising, particularly if you're working in high-performance teams. You're going to have passionate, motivated, intelligent people around the table, and that means that what you're going to have is different viewpoints. You're going to see things from a different point of view. So this is about appreciating and acknowledging the different points of view and being able to weigh all of those up together. Now, appreciating and acknowledging isn't necessarily just about going, oh yeah, that's great, that was great, that was great. It's important that you have aspects of both support and challenge. And so here it's a case of being able to summarize, listen, recognize and appreciate and support somebody to be able to make a contribution, but also challenge it. And so perhaps the easiest way of doing that in terms of challenging a particular view is simply isolating it and putting it up there and taking a pop at it. And what I would suggest you do is ask the person who offered that suggestion first, ask them to lead that challenge out. Okay, what would be the limitations of that particular view? What are the assumptions and biases that we might have behind that view so that we can scrutinize that? Support and challenge are two complementary areas of being able to really scrutinize information. People often think it's one or the other, but actually it's not. You can get high support and high challenge. The next step is to be able to create a system of prioritization. So that what you're able to do is kind of collect all of the information, all of the things that you need to be considered, and then be able to sort that out and lift to the top the things that you really need to work on. If you don't, then you're going to take on everything, and now you'll probably do lots of things really badly. Have a system of prioritization and then be able to assign responsibility, budget necessarily, and resources to support that initiative. If you don't have a prioritization system, then you're going to get overwhelmed with information, and it's probably just going to mean that it's going to get put in a report, stuck in a drawer somewhere. So the last factor about creating additions is the role of the leader. And I should have probably put this at the beginning, but if you think about the ones that I've mentioned previously, now you can probably see why it's important for the leader to be role modeling those behaviors. This is about vicarious learning and behavior, and the team members looking around the table and thinking, the leader's acting in that way. They are speaking openly. They are willing to listen. They are willing to encourage me to speak openly and appreciate my views. And that's going to foster momentum and more openness to this review process. Leaders, it's critical that you are on point with a performance debrief, because as soon as you go, nah, I don't think that's the case, everyone else is probably going to close up as well. I'll give you a good example. In Olympic debriefs that I've undertaken, for me, when I was researching debriefing and that quality process, one of the things it said was, what you shouldn't do is just jump in and say your opinion or your thoughts or your experiences. And when somebody had an experience about an Olympic program or Olympic performance, I'd sit there and think, I want to say, oh, that happened to me. Oh, that happened to me back in the day. Yeah. And when you do that, you take the emphasis off other people. So leaders, you've got to be really disciplined about making sure you're keeping this open and about extracting information from which you're able to utilise in the future. So that's creating the conditions. What are some of the key questions you can ask? Well, let's start with a really obvious one, but it's not as easy as perhaps it sounds. And that is, what are the facts of the situation? What are the indisputable, objective facts that we can establish about what happened during the process? What I like about this question coming first is that it sets an objective tone about what you're going to be discussing. It actually allows you to start just getting the facts out on the table before perhaps some of those opinions start to come in and start to get that interpretation of certain situations. The next question is to ask, what are the feelings and emotions that you've experienced during that phase of work? And here again, it's important to recognize, appreciate, and listening. It's important to recognize that these are valid in somebody's world. They experience a certain type of emotion, particularly if they're willing to express that emotion to other people. Then they've been a little bit brave to be able to do that. So recognizing the emotions of the situation. Did it feel edgy? Was it flighty? Was it stable? Was it boring? What happened during that experience? The next phase is about analysing the what. So that's what happened. That's how we experienced it. So what? What's the good and the bad about that? And knowing what that step is coming in the process, then actually that allows you to be a bit cleaner in establishing what feelings, emotions and facts and figures you've actually observed. And the next phase is, what could you have done differently? And so you've made sense of the what, and now it's a case of you starting to think, okay, what would we do differently to change the processes or change the outcome, knowing what we know now? Could you have prevented a disaster? Could you have done more preparation and planning and risk management? Could you have actually taken opportunities? Could you have stepped forward and said, let's do this under certain circumstances? So start to think through the different actions that you might take if you were to be able to replay that situation. So once we've undertaken those 4 steps, then it's a case of now thinking about moving to action. So this is a case of, okay, what are we going to do? Not a hypothetical version of that situation of what would we do differently. This is a case of now what we're going to do, and that means moving to decisions. So what resources, what systems, what processes, what plans are we going to put in place? Maybe some appointments. What sort of personal development might we need? So when it comes down to what you actually put through the debriefing process, I'm not sure it's my place to be able to tell you what you should be considering. And primarily when we work with companies and businesses and sports to sort of facilitate that performance debriefing process, actually there's a bit of pre-work that's required where you sit down with the leaders and team and you work through the kind of key areas that people are working through. But here's probably 5 areas that you might want to consider if you haven't done this before. And I've tried to put this together into a neat acronym. I was aiming for 5 P's, but I've got 4 P's and a C. So sorry it's a little bit messy. You'll understand why it's important that the C is included at the end. So the first P is performance. So what happened? What was the outcome? What were the results? So here's about a case of how did you get on? You were aiming for a certain thing. There was an ambition and a goal that you were pointing towards. So how did you get on in relation to that? The next P is people, and I'd encourage you to be making sure you're leaning into this conversation because people are the lifeblood of your organisation and your system and your business. And if you skip over this bit and just think about results and the systems that you've put in place, then you're missing an opportunity to think, nurture and develop the people and the systems that you've got that support them. So this is about considering individual and collective performance. How did you individually get on? And that could be one-to-one debriefs. And then how did we get on? What was our collective effort? And how effective were we at working together and moving towards our goals? The next P is processes. So it's likely that you would have put in place some systems and some plans to ensure a quality of your work. So this is about you thinking about those and reviewing them to see if they're fit for purpose and to see if they're effective. Standard operating procedures, they sound boring for some people, but actually they're important to make sure that you're doing good work and you're doing things in an ethical manner. The next factor is progress. So this is a case of you thinking, well, we've set those goals, we've set those processes in place, we've empowered our people. What changes were we hoping for? What adaptation, what innovations were we looking for? And how did we move the needle on those? This is very much a chance for you to see what new ground you have broken during the period of time, and for you to think about whether it was worth those changes actually being put in place. The final factor I'd encourage you to be taking a chance to reflect and debrief on. It's not a P, it's a C, and that is culture. And it's important you take a chance to think about the values and the ideals, the norms, the standards of behaviour that actually have been lived. Often people will take a chance to say, well, these are our values, this is our charter. And then they get sort of put in a drawer and forgotten about. And there has no system of actually developing the culture within an organisation. Good cultures don't happen by chance. They sometimes do accidentally, but often they require work to actually develop them. So please do take a chance to reflect and review and have some open discussions about how does it work around here? What's the vibe? What's our culture? It's far more important to your working effort than any project or anything that you might assign a budget to. So hopefully you've benefited from a structure there of the different conditions that you can create, the questions you can ask, and the different areas that you might want to put through the debrief process. But my final tip is simply do something. Do something that takes stock of how you got on. So many people, so many companies, so many sports skip that bit and they just start to crack on with the next project, the next goal, and the next landmark. And what they do in that instance is they miss an opportunity to learn and so be stronger for tomorrow. I hope this has been useful for you. Thanks for watching.